Before someone asks again, no, I don't have a black eye. This is just very unfortunate lighting, as you can see. There's nothing wrong with my eye. But let's get finally to the review of the Razer Blade Stealth 13-inch, the 2017 model. And it already took me in the first place quite a long time to get it. But I also stalled this review for one more week. Why? The reason is that I've used it for about 2.5 to 3 weeks, and the review period then would have just been already over. But for some reason I thought myself, am I missing something? Because on a very high-end level, of course, I was a little bit disappointed, especially from the really great experience of last year. But of course, 2017 was a year where we have seen a lot of high-end laptops that really delivered, like Huawei, Lenovo, Dell, all they delivered, absolutely. And this now is pretty much just on that level with a few compromises by now, or just a few drawbacks that I'm not the biggest fan of. And that's why I took that additional week to see if my daily life use experience changes. And that's what I want to tell you in this video. So let's get into the first thing, the design. Now, this being a 13-inch or 13.3-inch actually, it is still as big as the 12.5-inch of last year, where people just had a problem with the huge bezel. So definitely improved on that. But as you can see, it's still a little bit of a wider laptop than many other ones these days, because as you can see, it is wider, but therefore also a little bit shorter. But it makes up for that, especially in terms of width, because it has stereo speakers on the inside, which is absolutely fine. But other than that, I have to say it is still very, very thin. It is also with 1.3 kilograms quite light, but it feels a little bit heavier actually, which I have to say though might be a good thing, because therefore it also feels very solid. Nothing creaks and it feels very sturdy. And I actually prefer a little bit of premium heft if it makes up for that, if it feels more premium, even though it just seems heavier, which it isn't really. Of course, we have some rubber feet actually throughout the whole side, and actually these are providing it very nice, because this doesn't slip a millimeter, and actually it would actually move my table more than anything else. Of course, some cutouts for the fans. Now in terms of ports, what we have is USB Type-C, which is Thunderbolt, and would of course support the Razer's Core eGPU. Then of course we have USB 3.0 with the green port, of course, since it's Razer, a headphone jack, a cutout on the front, also USB 3.1, USB 3 again, and full-size HDMI. And what I definitely like a lot is the hinge, because due to the cutout we can easily open it. It's not too stiff, but as you can see here, the resistance is fine, so it won't move anywhere. This is very nice, and I really like the bezels. Now, as you can already see, maybe not so much on this background, the bezels have definitely cut down, but they are still not the smallest ones. I've definitely seen a lot laptops this year that were smaller, but this is totally fine. And like I said, you have more bezels on the side because you have also speakers, and in my opinion, that's totally worth the compromise. Now, this is also, of course, the touchscreen version. I don't think there's a non-touch version anyways this time. This is also the resolution of 3200 by 1800. But let's get a check of the inside. What should I say about the keyboard? What I definitely like is the Razer Synapse support, because this is a full RGB lit keyboard. And the only downside of this keyboard is that the secondary functions, as you can see, if I maybe go in a little bit closer, like for example for volume and brightness and so on, isn't lit up as well. So my quick and actually quite good solution is I just colored the ones that I need in a different color. And you won't really see that so much here on the video. And we have multiple steps, like at least 10. For example, for the volume I have green, for the brightness I have yellow, and so on. You can adjust pretty much everything you want to, and this is something that I definitely like a lot. But of course I would have also just wished to have the option to see the secondary functions. Otherwise, the layout is fine, but what I have to say, the typing experience is not the very best one, because the whole keyboard doesn't have a lot of travel, even though that is fine. My issue is actually that the dampening out is a little bit on the stiffer side and feels like similar to what the previous Dell XPS 13 models felt like. So kinda dead. You don't really get the tactile feedback that you want. If you type and don't really need any sort of feedback, you will have no issues with that. But if you really rely, like I for example do, on the feedback, and especially some parts of the keyboard, you will maybe make more mistakes because you think, did I hit it, didn't I hit it, and so much. So this is something that I just have to point out. It is I would say maybe really good still keyboard, just because of the lighting, the multiple steps, and the adjustments with all of what the Synapse software offers, which is great. But the keyboard, yeah, the feedback is a little bit dead. Other than that, though, the trackpad is absolutely top because it is a precision trackpad, which means you have 4-finger, 3-finger gestures in all directions, taps and all that. I love that. And also the precision is totally fine. The texture is great. It accepts everything just fine. Actually really good. And I will definitely give this a great trackpad. This is an absolutely top one, especially in terms of the overall feedback. What I have to point out, though, which is not something that all that great, is for a laptop of this price, we don't have a RealSense camera for Windows Hello. We don't have a fingerprint reader or anything else. It's not really important for me, but a lot of people definitely would like to see something like that. I'm pretty sure of that. Otherwise, let's actually go already into the display. The first thing that I have to point out, and that's what I want to do person to person, eye to eye, this laptop is using CABC, which means Content Adaptive Brightness Control, aka the devil. I just can't call it any other thing, and that's the exact same thing that I called it also already on Dell's laptops, because what it does is, if you have a dim, for example, like here, content, the whole screen will just dim down and the contrast will just get completely in a wacky way. As you can see here, now it will slowly brighten up. And what they did really nice, especially compared to what Dell does, it is a very smooth transition. So it slowly fades down, as you can see, and it slowly fades up. And this is a very natural and subtle movement, which is good. Dell made it very harsh, which I didn't like, but I still don't like this at all. Especially since there is no firmware that offers me to actually disable it yet. I heard that there is a firmware where you can disable it, but at least to my point, I asked for it and they told me they didn't get back yet, so they can't provide me with that one. So that's a big bummer, because that's why I didn't even make any spider tests with how good it is in terms of sRGB and so on, because it doesn't really matter, because I think the values would just get completely just kind of faked, or at least it would have been a compromise, because if you just use it in a bright environment, like for example in the browser here, the white is totally nice, also black levels are good, and I didn't really see any sort of backlight bleeds and so on. And colors, especially here, if it doesn't dim down, are natural, they are very vibrant and all good, but you just won't have this a lot. As you can see here, it already dimmed down. And this is just something that I can't enjoy, because this, in my opinion, is what I could easily call, just in terms of quality, I think a great panel. High resolution, 3200 by 1800, so very sharp, IPS, stable viewing angles. It is also absolutely bright enough without any issues at all. But then there is this CABC, which in some way already is a deal breaker, because I had, for example, this, and I've used it for over 2 weeks to watch Seinfeld. I rewatched the whole series, the show, and then I switched back for 1 or 2 seasons to my Xiaomi, and I just noticed of how much of a dull experience I had, because it's not just that colors are more dull. The whole colors are wrong, especially skin tones and so on are just completely off. I don't really know what else to say. This is a huge bummer, and that's why I won't get maybe more like a quite good. But let's actually check the sound now. I don't know what to call it, top, front, or stereos, because front facing that doesn't matter, but we have 2 speakers at the top, which is great because you can't block them. They're always facing kind of towards, you can actually even reflect a little bit from the screen. The maximum volume is absolutely good enough, totally fine. I've still heard actually louder ones. Just for example, something like the MateBook X was louder, but not as good in terms of quality. And it's very similar to maybe something like the Surface Book in terms of loudness. But there are louder ones, but this totally loud enough and really nice balance. And what we also have, which is actually quite nice, we have the Dolby software, even though I think it's still a little bit of a fake software because you can enhance things and so on. And this is all fine. But the speakers are really, really good. I would actually say maybe even very good. Now, headphone jack also really good, all fine here, loud, good quality, adjustable, equalizer and so on. So no further needs to talk about that. But what I want to talk about is the performance now. As you can see here, a super fast SSD. This, by the way, is the 512 gig version. Over 3 gigs of read and about 1.5 gigabytes of write speeds, which is of course not really dependent at itself, but about 7 to 8 seconds for a cold boot. But this device, I have to just say, even though we are pushing already quite a high resolution, just runs fine. For example, here in Chrome, and of course, if you jump between the apps, because this is also the 16GB version, and everything flies for a dual-core version, because I just have to point that out and repeat myself over and over again. This is dual-core without dedicated graphics, so that's why I didn't do any gaming tests, because I would expect you to get, I would say, an okay gaming experience for lower-end games, but not really on a AAA title game. So I don't see this for gaming because this is an ultrabook, and that's fine. But what it does really well, of course, YouTube, TV shows, word processing, and all daily tasks it handles absolutely fine, so you shouldn't worry about that. But what I also have to point out, by the time I got this for about a week or so, Razer announced already the newer version of this one with the quad core. So in case you maybe think about getting something super ultra portable like this for a 13.3 inch, you usually don't get, at least not yet, quad cores. You will get it, and then you can do things like Adobe Premiere or also Photoshop, and way better. Because it is possible here, like I always say, but I wouldn't really recommend it because it's not a satisfying experience, which it might be on the quad core, because especially for rendering times, even though we don't have a dedicated GPU, the CPU is more important, at least from my experience, so this is where it's top. Now, noise and heat. In terms of noise, I didn't really hear any sort of coil whine, not particularly, but what I heard sometimes was a sound from the insides that sounded like if a spinning hard drive would start, just starting sound, so a little bit of a click, and it was pretty much already dead. Once it charged, I heard some little bit of things, and what you also should consider, sometimes if you have a really high-res display as this one, and you scroll the content, you actually hear something. Didn't hear anything, so it is mostly silent if the fans aren't going on, and I would say that the fans are actually not a huge issue. They turn on a little bit more often than I would like to see, because I had already so small laptops, even without fans, like the MateBook X, so they turn a little bit more often on than they should, in my opinion, but it's not often. So I would still say 90%, it's completely silent, so no problems about that. The actual fan noise is also quite okay. It's a little bit on the higher pitched sound, but not really high-end pitch, but it's a very even sound, and it shouldn't really bother anyone. So there are more quiet ones, but it's a high quality sound. So this is totally similar to most other ones. Now heat, all fine. At some point it could maybe throttle, I'm pretty sure it will, because I'm also quite sure that the fans turn on more often, is that the cooling on its own is maybe not just the best, because we have quite few big cutouts, as you can see, which we don't have, because after all you have to consider how thin this laptop is, and there is just not much space for cooling, and I think they didn't go the extra mile to maybe try something like Huawei did, for example, with some special techniques and so on. This is pretty much a standard cooling system. Those days moderately warm and so on, so no big issues. Now in terms of software, what else should I say? Of course, like I said, we have Dolby Digital Plus, and we have the Synapse software, which I'm quite a big fan of, because you can adjust pretty much everything. You have a lot of options for the lighting, for the keys, profiles and all that, all good. And that's why I would already say that we should get to the summary. Let me quickly get it out of my head once again. Design and build. Design, a little bit wider, but it feels very good, because the build quality is absolutely, I would say, easily very good, if not almost great, because it feels sturdy, solid, thin. We have an actual good amount of ports, because 2 USB 3.0 ports with USB Type-C and an HDMI. This is something we actually don't get so often. This is not a common thing anymore these days, so all good here. Now the display, like I said, just in terms of qualities, potential, I think easily great, but with CABC, aka, like I said, the devil, it's a little bit of a disappointment. So this is actually one of my bigger disappointments, besides also the battery life, which I completely forgot to cover. So let's just talk about that. The battery life is about 5 to 5.5 hours, which is not all that impressive, because usually I would wish for at least 6 solid hours. Charging time was fine, under 2 hours, so all good is here. But of course, once again, I turn off all battery saving technologies, even though I couldn't turn off CABC. I expect you to get like 20% more, at least. So 7.5, maybe even more is okay for you. But just from what I see, 5.5 is good, quite good, not maybe really good. So yeah, keep that in mind. Other than that, let's get back to the summary. Performance is totally fine. Everything you would expect it to do for a dual core, it will just do fine. But even on idle, or at least not on super heavy tasks, the fans will turn on a little bit more often, but just for a short period of time, some short bursts, and it will maybe get a little bit hotter because it's just something so small. So in the summer, it could become more of an issue as now in the winter, but yeah, no issues. Software I like, it's fine, and it has a lot of resemblance from my experience to something like a Surface laptop, because it is very clean, minimalistic, besides what they add to it, because it also uses, like, for example, the precision trackpad software and all. So all good. The value. This configuration is at about $1,500. If you go maybe for the 256GB version, you should be at $1,300. But I just have to say that the value is not remarkably good, because especially with the downsides of the not that great battery life, that the fans aren't the very best on this kind of particular level. In the premium segment, we get better fans. It's totally fine, but it gets better. And then it's just CABC. Once the software to enable it to be disabled, you get what I mean, is available publicly, then I will actually bump my rating up at least by 1 point if I would have points. But then I would be much more pleased. But then also battery life would actually suffer even more. So as you can see, you make some drawbacks. You get what I think is a great design. Of course, not everyone likes the illuminated Razer logo, or otherwise, I like the black and RGB keyboard. If you don't want RGB, don't use RGB. The keyboard though is also a little bit dead. So just to cover my things that I would have wished for them to be improved for next year's, to not be high-end disappointed, is the following. Maybe add some sort of locking mechanism, like for example a real sense or a fingerprint reader, because for that price you should expect that. Then give me a keyboard that gives me a little bit of feedback. Nothing wrong with the trackpad at all. Turn off CABC, or at least give me the option for that in the settings or anywhere else, and I actually would be okay sacrificing to 20% more of battery life, which I guess would be what you would lose out about. Performance, no need to change anything. Of course, if you want quad-core, go for the newer version, but this is totally fine in terms of performance. Battery life, yeah, they should improve that. I'm not quite sure why this is not actually that good, because the battery is not that small. So it is what it is. Then maybe improve the cooling system a little bit more, so the fans don't even have to spin on that often, which wasn't a problem though at all. And then, yeah, then it would be worth the $1,500 or $1,300, whatever this costs. But as it is right now, especially since the market is so strong with a MateBook X, which is even smaller, or something like a laptop from the Surface laptop, of course, and maybe the Dell XPS 13, which are either more compact, have the better screen, have the better touchpad, or don't have CABC or similar things, and also better battery life. This one is not fully recommendable. Once the price goes down a little bit, once they maybe fix a few things, sure, especially if you are interested in the quad-core version, which will be one of the first ones, maybe with the Dell XPS 15, all is fine. But I told you all about the compromises, which you should decide now on your own. But that's all I can say, and I wish you a nice day. Until next time, bye.